Thanks for listening to the Clive Barker Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the works and worlds of Clive Barker. This is episode 155, Clive Barker's Nightbreed Epic Part 3, where we talk about the epic Marvel run of Nightbreed comic books. Specifically, this episode's all about Jihad 1 and 2, which is the Nightbreed Hellraiser crossover issues. We were originally also going to talk about issues 13 through 16, where it's the Nightbreed versus Rawhead Rex, but we ended up running out of time and we'll have to save that discussion for later. Yeah, so this is episode 155 of the Clive Barker Podcast. We're continuing our discussion about the Nightbreed comics, starting with the Nightbreed Hellraiser crossover comics, Jihad.
That's right. So the tagline for this comic book, and this was released on October 8, 1991, it was Living Hell Meets the Dead of Night. As you may remember, the Dead of Night, was that like a part of the tagline for Nightbreed, I think? Come meet the Dead of Night.
Oh, yeah.
And right. It says, it's been foretold in the icy malevolence of the stars, a diabolic high priest offering down a prayer for war, a war waged in the name of the cold altar of the infernal, an undead messiah and his monstrous flock steeling themselves against the battle for what's left of their souls. Two dark faiths, bearing fang and fury, in an unholy crusade, only one side will survive. From the midnight imagination of best-selling author Clive Barker come the merciless Cenobites and savage Nightbreed, clashing for the first time anywhere in a wicked war of warm blood, twisted betrayal, and unnatural redemption. So that's the tagline for this.
And for me, I have a lot of nostalgia for this book, the first one, because I bought this when it came out and read it over and over and over again. And I even named my iguana after the lizard in here, Aethnicus.
Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, this was written by Dan Chichester. He helped develop the Hellraiser concepts and guidelines for a horror anthology series from Epic Comics. It's usually referred to as the Hellraiser Comic Bible. He was also editor for not only Hellraiser, the comics with Mark McLaurin, but he also worked in the Nightbreed comics and then Jihad. And I think he was also editing Weaveworld, the Weaveworld adaptation.
Right, yeah. And I love the cover of this book. I mean, it's not really exactly, representative of what happens in the story, but it looks really cool. With Pinhead standing behind, and then you see Boone getting dragged down into hell by these Cenobites and chained.
Yeah. You're right. That doesn't really happen, but it is pretty cool. Yeah. It is a pretty cool cover. Instead, it's Alastor that is the main Cenobite that appears to the Nightbreed. But I guess I'm jumping a little ahead.
Yeah, well, so I love this opening page, and it shows the Cenobites all kneeling and doing this weird hand symbol in front of Leviathan. Yeah,
they're doing that thing with their hands. This is a detail that came from the Hellraiser comics, so there's a little bit of world building here. It's because in the comic books you saw hundreds of Cenobites or thousands of them in Hell in those anthology stories, and I think that's a cool callback to that.
And another interesting thing going into the world building here and the mythology of the comics and how it might be different. Pinhead, right, is the human part of Pinhead is Elliot Spencer. He's a World War I soldier, and we've talked about that lots of times. But he's got this subordinate that's like not even worth talking to, right? Alistair or Alestor or whatever. Yeah, and that's. His human part is much, much older than Elliot Spencer, right? He's like Roman.
Right, that's true, yeah. We'll find that out later, but yes, he's Roman.
So it's kind of like whenever Pinhead is talking, it's the spirit of Pinhead that's lived for millennia, right? Because it's like this Alastor character is referred to as sort of this young
right.
upstart who you don't get a turn to talk for like 2,000 years or something like that.
6,720 something, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, the thing is here that you have to think that this is the comic universe, and so there was a miniseries that I mentioned on the last episode, Pinhead. Mm-hmm. That was a 6-issue miniseries. So there you see that Pinhead comes back from prehistoric times.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
so in comparison to someone in the Roman Empire, then he is much older than Alastor.
And one of his incarnations was Zype Totek, the flayed one, which is also referred to in this book. Yeah,
he doesn't like that alter name that much though, because he doesn't want to be referred to as a god.
Yeah. He only wants to serve Leviathan.
Yes. But there is a cool parallel here in the opening. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, but it at the time that these were coming out, and then the ones we're going to talk about later in this issue with Rawhead Rex, they were developing, or Hellraiser 3 was getting close to coming out, and and it must have been kind of irksome to the people making the Hellraiser comics. That they've got this spirit totally devoted to Leviathan, and then Hellraiser 3 comes out, and he's like, rock and roll Pinhead,
Yeah, well, that was the movie. Again, I never really had much of an issue with changes between the comics and the movies, just because of the different continuities that they had, and the anthology continuity kind of breaks that up a bit as well. You don't pay that much attention to it because it's like, hey, different writers come in and write their takes on Pinhead.
But they even adapted Hellraiser 3 to the comic series.
There is an adaptation. That's right. Yeah.
Although I think it's not part of this universe, is it? It's hard to tell.
I think it might be, I guess. The thing is, Marvel did a lot of adaptations of movies. I mean, I remember having the RoboCop 1 and 2 adaptation, the Hellraiser 3 adaptation, the Conan the Barbarian adaptation, and all those cool comic books that they would, because they knew that there was an audience that wanted to read those adaptations. And but it's kind of weird though, because you have a comic book character that is turned into a movie, and then they turn the movie into a comic book again. So it's weird, right? But so I was going to say that this there's a cool parallel in the opening of the issue number 1 where there's an anatomy lesson being given by Pinhead to his Cenobites.
Yeah.
And they kind of pair that with Peliquin making love to a woman called Patricia Denham. And these are
calls her Patsy.
Yeah, both two artists doing, performing some sort of artwork. Both characters are good at it. There's some double entendre here where Patricia tells Peliquin how easy it is that they come together.
Yeah, right.
So, but yeah, it's cool to see Pinhead teaching the surgeons from beyond, saying things like, oh, see, this is we cut here and we slash there, and then we took out the vocal cords for this lesson, but you will also be enjoying the screams when you work on your victim. So that's great. That's great stuff for me. Yeah.
And it reminds me of Hellraiser, right? The juxtaposition of the moving the mattress up the stairs and slicing Larry's hand on the nail,
right?
With the thrusting and the sex that Julia is remembering with Frank.
With Frank, that's right. Yeah. So, but pain and pleasure, that's right, indivisible. But here, so Peliquin is having sex with a human woman, and I think this might be something some people might not be entirely comfortable with, because I know that some people out there think that Peliquin hates everything that's human and all that, but I don't know, because if you read the Nightbreed Chronicles written by Clive Barker, then you will find out that Peliquin is known as the best lover in Midian. And it makes sense that he would, be a very libidinous character, and why stop at the breed? Why not actually seduce some humans, especially now that he doesn't have to live in Midian anymore?
Well, and I think he actually kind of falls for this character, because his relationship with her is kind of is an important part of the story arc.
That's true. So Peliquin finishes his romantic tryst with Patricia, and right on cue, Patricia's former lover, Tony, the gangster, shows up with his mobsters, and there's a conflict going on here. And, of course, there's a first action scene of the comic book where Peliquin decides to introduce them to the warm red.
Yeah. And it's weird that Angelo's mobsters are named like...
Tony.
Oh, yeah, Tony's mobsters are named Angelo, and the other one he just keeps calling Babe. So I don't know if Babe is his nickname, or if if they're in a relationship together. Guys
don't know. I think it's just sarcastic, or maybe it's just a nickname. Sometimes mobsters have funny nicknames like the Teflon Don, or the Iceman, or something like that. So, but there's a great fight scene here.
Well, and Peliquin says, it looks like he's coming by for a quickie. But really, he's got these other guys in the car, and they've got weapons. It seems like he was already onto the fact that she was cheating on him with somebody. He didn't know, of course, that it was Peliquin.
Right. Yeah. And Peliquin just jumps out of the window and starts, like, hacking and slashing and all that.
I love the artwork in this too. Like this picture of Peliquin biting her Patsy's finger, and there's a little bit of blood coming out of there. That picture of his face is so good.
It is. They really add to the stripes and streaks across his face and his tentacles, and it's very well done. Paul Johnson does a good job here with this. But in the meantime, while Peliquin unleashes the red, as he calls it, and he starts like hacking and slashing, Pinhead has this kind of like brief moment of not doubt, but it's brief moment of distraction when he's doing his anatomy lesson, because the chaotic nature of the breed kind of offends Pinhead a bit. And every time they do something like this, where they clash with the humans, I guess Pinhead gets a little bit of like a little prick in the back of his head, I guess.
Yeah, and he says the stench of chaos.
Yes, that's true. So, but I think that Pinhead's soliloquy during his anatomy lesson is just brilliant. I think Dan Chichester is the other guy apart from Atkins who can write really good dialogue for Pinhead.
Yeah,
I think he nails Pinhead down perfectly.
Yeah, that was another part that I really loved about this, because I think that Pinhead, he's in the Hellraiser comics a little, but not a ton. And this comic kind of is a good introduction for people who don't really know the Nightbreed or the Hellraiser comics like I was at the time, to say, hey, these are all my favorite characters.
Right. So Peliquin eventually does short work of the gangsters, and
it's really brutal too. I mean, he bites one of them's kneecap off, Petey, and stabs one in the gut with his axe or something. Takes his own axe away from him and stabs him in the gut with it.
Yeah, and he cuts Tony's hand off with his own claws.
Yeah.
So jihad, of course, means a struggle. It means a struggle. It's considered one of the pillars of Islam, and I think in this title, it's very well used to talk about this kind of holy war.
Holy war, yeah.
Yeah. But then, of course, so we cut the action to Laurie playing some music with Tater, the little monster girl at Nick Naven's, and it's a wonderful splash page they got here.
Yeah.
Again, the artwork is really amazing.
And it's bringing us back to say, okay, now we're back to our original story arc that we left off in the
Blasphemers, issue 12.
Yeah, and they started out by saying, okay, we know that you guys all like Peliquin. Where has he been all this time? Now we're explaining, he's been with this woman.
Right. I would have changed this. I mean, I'm going to go ahead a little bit and just talk about issue 2. Mm-hmm. I would have started the whole story differently. I know that, like you were saying, that they put Peliquin in the opening and Pinhead because those were the two fan favorite characters.
Yeah.
I would have started this with like Dimolay and the Aboriginal guy, Khadija. I would have started there. I would have liked to see the story start there, like some centuries ago, and what happened, and introduce the battle between the Nightbreed and the Cenobites and the humans. But, this is how it starts. It's also pretty good.
And I think you're right, because I got this issue when it first came out, but I didn't get this number 2 for years after until eBay, just because I could never find it anywhere in comic shops.
Right.
And so when I got issue 2, it was a little disappointing, because it's like, who are these people? What has this got to... it seems like they crammed a lot of the really important story elements into number 2. Into a shorter period of time. But we'll get... It definitely
could have... Yeah, it definitely could have had at least 1 or 2 more issues in this miniseries, and it would have helped the story a lot, because like you said, they try to cram too much story, and sometimes it feels like there's some leaps that happen and you're not entirely sure. There's not a lot of characterization of some of these characters. Some of these characters, I wish I could connect the name to the character a little more and get some more backstory on them, like, who they are. But anyway, so in this comic book, of course, Laurie already came to the realization of what her power is, and it's like when she plays the guitar, she kind of can reanimate dead matter, skeletons, creepy crawlies from under the ground. And so she's doing that to Tater to show her a quick recap. I guess it's inevitable that in every one of these stories you have to do a little recap of where the Nightbreed comes from,
especially
what happened.
When you've got people that only read the Hellraiser comics coming over and going, oh, thanks, no, I didn't really read any Nightbreed stuff.
Oh, yes. So again, Laurie tells little Tater about the story of the Nightbreed and where Cabal comes from. Great little retrospective there. And then, of course, Nick Naven already has Aiello's body. Aiello was one of the blasphemers from the previous story arc. And she says that there's something going on. There's some signals, and they're waiting for some signals of what's going on. And
there was also a little chunk of the Nightbreed mural that has a picture of Pinhead and the Cenobites and the puzzle box.
Right.
On the wall of prophecy.
There is one. It starts with Pinhead and it ends with Boone, the Wall of Prophecy. So that's very significant. It's going to pay off a little further ahead. They keep... One of the things that annoyed me a little bit was in this book they kept misspelling on the little speech bubbles. They kept misspelling deity, and they spelled it D-I-E-T-Y instead of D-E-I-T-Y. So that kind of annoyed me a little bit because deity is misspelled like 2 or 3 times. But so there's the signal in the skies, and Nick Naven has a telescope, and she shows Boone. And he sees it. First he only sees stars, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute, what's that? And it's like there's this weird like vision that he sees in the middle of the stars of the skull that appears, this gleaming skull in the sky.
Something weird that I'd noticed too, they call it like the Ra's al Ghul. Like, I'm not a DC fan, so that didn't mean anything to me back then, but reading it now I'm like, oh, that's like have to do with Batman. And
yes, that's a villain in the Batman comic books, of course, but here it's just meant to be in Arabic. It translates to ghoul's head or demon's head.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And the American name for that is actually Demon Star. And they also mentioned that the Chinese call it Cai Shi, the pile of corpses. Yeah. I couldn't verify if that's actually the translation.
Yeah, but that's cool. I mean, I like Nick Naven's magic, which we get a lot more of later on in this series too. Yeah,
and it looks like she's got a really cool telescope too.
And that picture, I love that picture of Babette putting Oral's teeth in.
Mm-hmm.
And there are all these like different sets of animal teeth and jaws and stuff like that.
That's pretty cool. I like Oral. I like him a lot.
And now we're sort of reminded that, he's kind of like married to Nick Naven, and so he's like a stepfather for Tater.
Yeah, I guess he is in that position, isn't he? Right. So back to Hellraiser. There's There's some great stuff from the expanded mythology of the comics, namely the Cenobites like Balberith, the Librarian of Hell, and Flagellum, the virgin Cenobite that Leviathan uses to speak through. Yeah. They show up here in this scene where they're reading a book, or maybe the book is reading itself because the book is made out of, hey, it's the original Facebook, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's a book where the pages are made of faces, the skins of faces, and they speak the story of what's written there.
And so this stretched out face is saying, a reading from the second letter of Pazuzu to the Sodomites.
Right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And of course, you see a nice splash of Leviathan, and there's like Pinhead is performing mass for everyone. And then he says something that has been misattributed commonly to Clive Barker, but it actually belongs to the writer Gustave Flaubert. It is be regular and orderly in your life, that you may be violent and original in your work. That's one of Pinhead's quotes, which is actually from Gustave Flaubert. But you'll see some memes every once in a while on the internet saying, oh, they put this quote and they say Clive Barker. It's like, nope, it's not Clive Barker.
Yeah,
it's not. It comes from this.
My first instinct was that it came from this comic, and I thought that, D.G. Chichester, but, obviously he quoted it from somewhere else.
Right. So amazing double splash of all the Cenobites here. I wish I had this original. I do have a page from this issue, I think, or is it issue number 2? I think it's issue number 2.
And I love seeing original Cenobites from Hellraiser in here, like the Chatterer, and we've got the female Cenobite.
Yes, and
a lot of times they get left behind, and it's usually just Pinhead.
In this splash, you can see Flagellum over there. You see the female Cenobite, like I said, Chatter. There's a Balberith is the one with the big eyes holding the book.
Yeah.
There's Face, I think that's his name, the one with a stapled face on his face.
Oh, is he in this picture? I don't see him.
He is back there next to Abigor, who is Pinhead's girlfriend, I guess. And then you have this new host of Cenobites that some of them look a little funny, others look better than others. But there's Alastor has the big axe, right?
Yeah, and they're the Pseudo-Thay, third reserve, first circle.
There you go. Gehenna, I think, is the skeleton tied to a board.
Yeah, he's so weird.
I know. Yeah. Chalkis is the flying blackbird that's always on Alastor's shoulder.
Yeah.
There is Charon, the big hammered guy with a beak face.
Yeah, and like snakes for hair, I guess.
Yeah. There's Yama Vidatu. She wears the red mask and the ponytail and the red latex fetish wear.
And she's always stabbing with that spear that it's like a crescent shaped blade, and then a spear jams out of the end of it and stabs through people's necks and stuff.
And there's a little pinhead guy, a little small pinhead called Zafan.
Yeah.
He's got a bellows that squirts out fire.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a few more, but Eshma Diva. She's that scarred, yellow-looking lady. I don't know if she's supposed to be covered in fur or those are scars or whatever, but she looks golden, furry kind of creature.
Yeah, really, really strange. So, having read these first, I can't remember. Are these characters, do they appear in the Hellraiser comics prior to this?
I'm not sure. I know they appear in the comics at some point because I remember reading the origin stories of Cenobites like Gehenna, that he tried to save like his son from like the fire pit of Gehenna where children were sacrificed.
Yeah, I do remember that too.
Yeah. So I think they appeared in like either the Devil's Brigade or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But so the Pinhead is performing mass, and they're worshiping Leviathan, and then he's pontificating, I should say, on the Nightbreed and how they're a blasphemy to the Cenobites and they're a danger to the war on flesh. And then Alastor interrupts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like, no, your turn will not come for 6,727 years, 3 months, 5 days, 12 hours, 22 minutes, and 48 seconds.
And then he complains that you're out of breach, a serious breach of protocol.
Yeah.
But just as he's about to raise his scythe and strike down Alastor for breaking protocol. I think that Flagellum gets like the Leviathan descends upon Flagellum and says, "Wait," and that's when he allows Alastor to explain what his plan is to defeat the Nightbreed.
I'm a little confused here because I think this is a sort of a weak point in the plot, because it seems to me, I guess first of all, that Alastor's plan is not very good if he was about to get murdered and he was depending on Leviathan intervening. I mean, how did he know that was going to happen?
I guess it was a gamble.
Yeah, and second, Pinhead is much wiser than Leviathan, right? I mean, in this comic series here, Leviathan takes a chance on this war on the Nightbreed, and Pinhead seems to know better.
I know. It seems like Pinhead has more experience dealing with Alastor, personally, because he seems to have this sort of, I wouldn't call it a feud, but he doesn't think very highly of Alastor.
Yeah. Yeah, he looks down on him. Yeah.
But, you know, either way, I mean, a Leviathan wants to hear what he has to say, and then he says that that he would like to see a holy crusade against the infidels, a jihad. And he decides to rename Alastor's little group as the Esh Mezaref, the purifying fire. And it's interesting because this actually comes from the title of a book. It's a Hebrew text from the 16th or 17th century. It's called the Esh Mezaref, or Purifying Fire. It's a book written by a guy called Christian Nor von Rosenroth. I looked it up. You can find this book online as part of the archive.org. Yeah, Google that. I guess if you're into sacred texts, it could be interesting.
So then Leviathan gives them permission to go do this thing, which Pinhead is not happy about, and he's about to kill him anyway, and Chatterer kind of stops him and is like... So, is that Chatterer? Is Chatterer talking?
No, that is Alastor's mouth.
Oh, okay. Silence, Master. Let us hear the word of the Leviathan.
Yeah, he's referring to Pinhead. He's saying, let's hear what Leviathan has to say. Okay. You see the hooks and the golden tooth there? They're the same ones in Alastor's mouth.
Oh, that makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Why is Chatterer talking?
But then there's a funny thing where they're talking afterwards, after the mass ends. Pinhead with his golden pins, which I think is a nice touch here.
Yeah.
But he's like retouching his little golden pin, and Alastor comes by and says, "Oh well, you know, I hope that we can bring greater glory to Leviathan. It's an honor to work with such a legend." He's trying to be like, he's trying to give Pinhead praise, but you know it's empty praise. We know that they don't like each other. Yeah. And he's like, "Oh, can I adjust your little pin there?" And Pinhead actually like skewers his face with a chain. Yeah, and then he says something like, "Yours is a rectum by which the abyss itself pales in comparison." And then,
He says, what did he say?
Yeah, and she says, "I think he just called you hell's biggest asshole." Yeah. That's a funny little aside there. Yeah.
It's a little out of character for Pinhead to say that, even in that language, but.
No, I think it's just great. I think it's great. So, of course, the Esh. That's a weird one. That's a mouthful to say, but. Yeah. I was going to say the Esh Mezaref, the group of Alastor's Cenobites, they're talking about themselves, about their plan, and they say, well, we can't trust Pinhead, you know.
He's part of the old guard.
Right. So he says, well, it's okay. We don't need the lament configuration to serve our plan. We can just use other conundrums that will provide the obsession needed to swing wide the gates. And so they play a little fast and loose with the idea that if you want something bad enough, if you have a yearning and burning desire, that you can summon a Cenobite. They play a little fast and loose in this story with that.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
It's an interesting conundrum, an interesting idea, and it's only hinted at in this first book, but they don't explain it until the second book.
Right. They set up a plan in motion where there's a bigger bigger doorway that's being set up for the Cenobites to be able to go through, which is it seems to be a recurring idea. Like Hellraiser 3 was always the same thing. Hellraiser 3 was about opening the gates, laying low the ramparts, being able to create hell on earth. Hellraiser 4 was about creating a giant pathway through which the Cenobites could come into our planet. So it seems like it's always on Leviathan's mind to break the barriers between both worlds.
So that
and this is no exception.
So they can just come and go whenever they want. Right.
So, again, Peliquin is seen driving with Pats after he fought off the mobsters, and they discover they're being followed. So,
yeah, right. And here's another one of those sort of comic book things where, we're being followed, and he crashes through the windshield and goes right through the windshield of the RV that's following them. Yeah. And it's Boone, and he kind of looks like he's laughing. He's like, hey, hey, Peliquin, this is the only way we knew how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, I guess you have to assume at this point that they either can sense where Peliquin is or something, because in this story, it seems like characters that are out in the middle of nowhere, you can always find them really quickly. And that happens in the Nightbreed comics as well, that we'll talk about. But
usually you find your Nightbreed friends by ramming your car into them or crashing through their windshield.
And Peliquin is a little surprised, and he gets a little angry. He's like, "Cabal, you mongrel bastard!"
Yeah.
And this is the page that I own in my collection. I own the original of this one, where Peliquin crashes through the the windshield, and then he's just sitting there, and they're talking about, hey, there's something serious about the Nightbreed. We have to take you away from your girlfriend, and he's like, well, no way, she's coming with me. So. Yeah. And, of course, we see that Alastor has put his plan in motion, where he breaks into our world through the
mysterious
desire.
Yeah, the mysterious configuration that he's created that we don't know what it is yet.
Actually, it's from the desire of this Nightbreed that's trapped by hunters. He looks like a giant buffalo, but he's like humanoid.
I thought he was just using the one that they set up early. I guess not.
No, I think this is because he explains here that his obsess over escape. There's a buffalo-headed Nightbreed being hunted down by hunters in the middle of the night, and Alastor explains. Yeah. Alastor explains that his obsess about the escape is such fervent desire must not go unrewarded. So they show up in this little refuge where the guy's holding up the Nightbreed, and the Nightbreed asks, "Can you please help me in my torment?" And they say, "Of course, we're experts at it." And they just kill him. Yeah. They just destroy him. And
so I didn't understand it that way at all. I mean, I thought we can just go ahead and they set up the puzzle to be the baby inside of Patsy, right?
Okay.
So that ever since the conception, I thought that they had free reign to come in and out of the world whenever they felt like it.
I took it differently. I took it that they were first playing fast and loose with people's desires, being able to summon them from across the schism, just like Chenard does it, with using Tiffany to open the box. And then they say, it's not hands that call us, it's desire. And here it's the same thing. They're talking about the obsession and the fervent desire of escape from this Nightbreed. And I think that's what they use as an excuse to be summoned. But it may be enabled by the other plan they put in motion too. I mean, I wouldn't put it.
They still wouldn't in Hellraiser 2. Just Chenard being obsessed wasn't enough. They still had to open the puzzle box.
That's true. Well, now thanks to Scarlet Gospels, Pinhead could cross over anytime he wanted, just using magic.
Yeah.
So
right.
It kind of breaks the rules there, right? Mm-hmm. But anyway, so they show up. They kill that Nightbreed. They also kill the humans that are hunting him. And they're just going to do that for a lot of these Nightbreed out there. And they start killing Nightbreed, just showing up where they are and just killing them and going back to hell.
Yeah, which is like it's like this high school football team with a shotgun had trapped this poor creature in the cave, and they were about to go in the cave and kill it, I guess. So it seems to me that Alastor and his group could have just gone in the cave and killed that Nightbreed and then left. They didn't have to go outside of the cave just to fight all these kids.
Sure. But here's the kicker. They're Cenobites, so...
Yeah.
And that's the part of their nature that's chaotic as well, and that's why Pinhead doesn't like them.
Yeah.
Because they're going to get people who have nothing to do with their plan. Mm-hmm. And not just that, but there's a funny moment here where he says, one of the hunters says to the other, "Don't piss your pants about it, Leo. We'll just shoot the damn thing." Yeah. And then the Cenobite appears and says, "Oh, yes, please piss your pants, shoot your shorts." And it says here, "For we have come to take you in an experience in a whole new order of anatomy, lacking certainly in the uneven orifices which would normally mar the outer form for the purpose of relief." So you can imagine they take these humans back to hell and they stitch up all the holes in their bodies just to torture them.
Wow.
It's just something a Cenobite would do, I guess.
Yeah. God. Yeah.
Yep. He says a restrained rebirth that is designed to leave you praying for the simple pleasures of bodily functions.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
And then next we get introduced to Paracelsus, who's like the alchemist. And his name's been mentioned in previous comics, but we never saw him before.
Right. Well, Paracelsus was actually a real historic figure, I think. And he's more well known for creating the legend of the alchemical homunculus, which is something that an alchemist could create as this sort of little human slave that could help him perform magic acts. Yeah. And it's really gross. I'm not going to get into the way how you could create a homunculus, even though I've read about that before. I used to have some books about the occult and supernatural, and it's like
I love Kinski's line. What kind of hamsters you keeping in this habit trail here, Paracelsus?
Yeah. So they're coming to talk to him about what's going on, and they say that he says, "Well, I have something to tell you about the berserkers that you guys are not going to like." And they're like, "Oh, really? What happened?" And it's like, well, apparently Paracelsus had created the berserkers during World War I for the German command, and he gives a little bit of backstory there. And then he says, "Well, I awoke last night to the sound of thunder, and I ran to the barn, and it looks like the barn where we see at the end of Nightbreed, the movie."
Does, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he says, Peliquin says, "Cut to the chase," and then he says, "Well, I went into the barn where the berserkers were, and I found this." And he opens, and there's a splash page with all the berserkers have been killed, and there's a lament configuration covered in blood at the bottom of on the floor.
And they're all strung up and skinned and in chains and stuff.
Right. So it seems that Alastor strategically decided to show up and destroy their secret weapon, the Nightbreed secret weapon, their muscle, so to speak. So now they don't have an army to fight Alastor when the time comes.
Yeah, which it's a bold move for this comic series, right? Because the Berserkers were pretty instrumental in the end of the movie Nightbreed. Yeah.
So they cut to another instance where Alastor is going to kill more Nightbreed. And then this time we see there's a couple of little talking lizards that are living in the natural world by being part of this exotic animal emporium. And some guy is going nuts because he just realized that his lizards can talk to him. And he's doing all this math thinking about, I'm going to create, greatest show in the modern world, talking lizards. Yeah, I'll call it Gentiles, Believe It or Not. It's like that. There's already one of those, buddy.
Yeah.
But he's just talking about Entertainment Tonight and thinking to himself, making, how much money he's going to make. And then here's the thing that kind of validates my interpretation of this is that you hear the voice of Alastor and the other Cenobites saying, that this human is driven by a furious longing. Is it enough of an invitation, this haunting appetite for money? And they say, all right, let's do it. So the Cenobites cross over and they attack this guy, and they find the two lizard Nightbreed and they kill them.
Yeah. which was really kind of sad. I mean, Axt was sad too, just to see them, when they die. But he's like, little brother, and he's just a skeleton on the bottom of the tank.
I know, because he's been killed by Gehenna.
Yeah.
So, and then cut to Pinhead confronting Alastor and saying that you're not keeping the balance. You're not. You abuse the rules of crossing over, and it's like there's a cost to discipline. So you're being too chaotic. But yeah, Alastor doesn't really care, and
and now he's not being a sycophant anymore. Now he's saying now he's openly, because he's got Leviathan's blessing. He's openly disrespectful to Pinhead. When Pinhead's showing him what are they called, Scylla and Charybdis, or I think.
Yeah, those are the two snake-like.
Echidna and Basilisk. Yeah.
Yeah, they're two serpent-like Cenobites that stand under the rotating diamond of Leviathan, and they're supposed to represent the balance of the Leviathan's realm, I guess. If they start fighting each other like it happens in one of the Hellraiser comics, I think it's the Devil's Brigade again. But there's one issue where those two creatures start fighting each other, and that represents an imbalance in the force, Yeah. So, yeah.
With which do you hope to impress me, Zyptotec, your chattering lackey, or the tiresome dances of the snakes? So he's openly disrespectful. Also to the Chatterer, which is not cool.
So the Nightbreed eventually gather for a meeting because they discover, there's lots of our fellow members are dying, are being murdered. There's something going on. We have to get together and discuss what the problem is and how can we find a solution. Mm-hmm. So you have another awesome splash here, 2-page splash.
Yeah, which shows a lot of Nightbreed from the movie that we haven't seen in the comics.
That's right. You find the guy with the stretched out face back there.
Yeah.
And here's the another guy with the messed up face that is holding a tiny little baby in the dark. When the Sons of the Free attack, there's Babette there, partially beastly form. You see Leroy Gaume and a bunch of people, Devil Lude. So they have a piece of the mural. So they're arguing about it, and they say, here's a little piece of the mural. There's this Cenobite in it with a little box. And they discover that maybe something from the past has returned to hunt the breed. And they're partially right, except it's not really Pinhead.
Yeah. Yeah, and they have that little piece of the mural that Gallows took before the fall of Midian.
And they have the box that was left behind in the Berserker's murder scene.
Yes, which is kind of cool because you're expecting that somebody's going to mess with it and open it and summon the Cenobites, and Peliquin's like, oh no, if something gets in your way, you destroy it, and he smashes the box into a bunch of pieces. Which is
the first time I see anybody do that to a box, I think.
Yeah, right. I mean, they always just kind of feel indestructible, at least in the Hellraiser lore.
Right. But then Cabal gets this like spidey sense tingling, and Pat starts getting a tummy ache. Yeah. And then here, I believe this is where the Alastor's plan that you were mentioning, and the gateway that he's trying to create is actually put in place, because the Cenobites do teleport into the middle of the Nightbreed reunion, and all hell turns loose. And Alastor is the guy who raises his big giant double-edged axe and just brings it down on Boone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brutal. Just embeds it right into him. It looks like it should have gone right through to the other side.
Right. And so here we finally understand what the purifying fire, the Esh Mezaref, are trying to accomplish. When Alastor says, "Hey, hello, Nightbreed. Your Baphomet abandoned you after Midian. Your Cabal lies dead here. If you want gods to worship, worship us, because that's what he wants to do. He wants to be worshipped. He wants to become a god. He has a plan to become a god.
Yeah, it seems like a kind of a stupid plan, but we'll get to that in the next issue.
Right.
And then, so the next issue, like I'd said, I didn't really own this for a good 8 years later. So it doesn't have the same kind of issue 2 doesn't have the same kind of nostalgia for me as the first one does. And there's a lot of weird stuff that takes a while to understand what's going on.
It does. It opens with this apparently unrelated scene where here's the tagline for the second issue. It says, "Praying won't save you. It's a holy war. It rose from the blood-forged steel of an ancient knight's arcane sword. Malefic zealots plotting the overthrow of a hellish god for their own ascension. Impassioned monstrosities making pagan sacrifices in the name of love and survival. Warring religions of the midnight hour, fighting for the chance to destroy each other." So that's the introduction to this second issue.
Yeah, and so you're right. It opens with this scene, and it's like, what is this paladin from, presumably the 12th century or something? What is he doing with an Aboriginal in Australia?
Yes. That is Jacques de Molay, and he was, like you said, from the 11th century, I think, 1243, and he died in 1314. He was the 23rd and last Grand Master of the Knights Templar Order. So he was tortured into making false confessions, and then they burn him at the stake as a heretic and all that. So, but yeah, basically what happened to the Templars was that they were the first bankers of medieval history, and people who traveled throughout Europe, they could put their money in one Templar, account, and then they could take it out in another place, and they would honor it, and they would be like a bank. But that gave them too much power because they were getting too much money. And then, of course, Pope Clement, I think, started, saying, "Oh, these guys are blasphemous. They, initiation rites to be in the Templars means they have to step on the crucifix and spit on it and do unspeakable acts of sodomy and all this." So that's when
seen a bearded god in their travels that they called Baphomet.
That's true. Yeah. But nowadays people believe that that whole Baphomet thing is just a corruption of Muhammad. So that came from a corruption of Muhammad, which in some cultures is mentioned as Moame or Bafoma or Baphomet. So that's how, Baphomet is not really, it's more like a corruption of the Islamic Muhammad. So that's where it really comes from.
But here of course they're putting the two together and say, Baphomet is the Baphomet of Nightbreed.
Yes. So in here he's saying that he had a nightmare about the Nightbreed and the Cenobites, and he's trying to eat the host that he has, the body of Christ. But as soon as he touches it, it starts causing his hand to bleed, and he can't commune of it. He's cursed, and then the other guy, Khadija, I think that's his name. He says that. Well, if that thing is holy, then that explains why it doesn't want anything to do with you. And he eats the little communion host. And, and then he says, well, that he's afraid of his dream about the Cenobites and the Nightbreed. And he says, what if you can't hear and see them without fear? And then it says, that'd be simple then, mate. Then you're dicked. Yeah. It's a funny dialogue from this Aboriginal shaman.
Yeah. Then they cut to the what's going on with this battle that just started as the teaser for the last issue, and we've got, is it Ashma Diva? I think is cutting into oh gosh, what is his name?
Vasti Moses.
Yeah, Vasti Moses, and we learn here that he's not fat; that it's all muscle underneath.
Right.
And he sucks her up and eats her.
Yes, he does. He does. Suck in that stomach. 1, 2, 1, 2, and he kind of pulls her hand, into him, and he pulls what is like if you remember the X-Men, there's an enemy called the Blob.
Yes.
And he can do that. Like if someone punches the Blob, he can hold their arm in place and just start pulling it in.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what he does here. But again, another great two-page splash page here with all the Nightbreed being tortured by the Cenobites. And Narcisse is here. He's trying to rescue little Tater.
Yeah.
Devil Loot is being tortured. And there's just Cenobites and creatures all around.
Which,
so
it's cool to see Nightbreed as the shepherding the children away, kind of like what we saw in the extended versions of Nightbreed. You know, come on, kids, let's go upstairs.
So the box didn't open this portal. It was the baby that Pat is carrying from Peliquin. Alastor's plan is to gather prayers and adoration from the breed to call himself a god. But Pinhead shows up with Chatterer to inspect what's going on, and he tells Alastor, well, you're pseudothai. You're a false god. That's what it's supposed to mean.
I
and
love
he confronts
in the splash page that he's standing there with his arms crossed, looking like, I don't approve of this at all.
Right? Yeah. So yeah, there's plenty of like individual fights going on that we can see here, and I'm sure that if you have the comic book, this is really a pleasure to look at. But then, of course, there's a confrontation between Pinhead and Alastor.
Yeah, and I like when Devil Loot is all chained up, kind of like Frank at the end of Hellraiser, and the Chatterer pulls out a knife and he's all ready to go to work on him, and Pinhead says, "Stay the sacrament of suffering, brother. Alastor's cacophony transgresses against our Lord Leviathan's teachings. We must not add to his blasphemy."
Yes. So you can see there that Pinhead doesn't want to be any part of this. He just thinks that this is not what it's supposed to be, done, and this is the wrong way to go about it. And then he understands that Alastor is just in it for his own self-aggrandizement,
And there's this weird Nightbreed character that is like is it a woman that holds her head up in the air and blood constantly pours out of her mouth into her neck, and she's kind of like, and then what's his name?
Gehenna.
Gehenna comes over and cauterizes the wound on the stump.
Yes.
So she can't do that anymore.
And you don't understand if he thinks that he's helping, because he says, praise Leviathan, I reached you in time, child. The erratic pulse of blood from your body's neck cries out for cauterization's blessed stability.
God, I know. Yeah, thanks a lot, jerk.
Yeah. And then she's going like, oh no, I'm thirsty. I need drink. I need some blood, because she can't do it anymore. But anyway, so Alastor confronts Pinhead and whips out his giant axe, which that's got to be the most telegraphed attack in the history of attacks, because that thing is just so big.
Yeah.
But Pinhead has his back turned to him, and as they're discussing what's going on, and you do not march proudly with the ranks of the Cenobites. You're a disgrace to your piercings, Alastor. And then Alastor says, oh yeah, well here. And he kind of swings his axe at Pinhead and hits him in the head with it.
Yeah, which should have chopped his head in half. I mean, just for how deep it went in.
Uh-huh.
But it's the same thing with Cabal. He should have been cut in half too with that axe.
I guess he swerved just in time. So what happened was he just lost a few pins. And I like Pinhead's reply to him. He says, you are an offense to symmetry.
Yeah.
Again, another insult that doesn't sound like an insult at first, but it totally is for a Cenobite.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a little part in here that's kind of corny where he's going to swing again to finish off Pinhead, and the Chatterer catches the axe in his teeth.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you learn that he has a name. Just like Pinhead is Zyptotec, Chatterer is another handful, Miklantecutli.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Chatterer's real entity name, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of wish the Chatterer could do more stuff, I mean, he couldn't move in the movie, but, now he's got weapons and he could fight with something besides his teeth.
Right. So the tide of the battle turns here. The breed counterattack. Eshma is killed. Paracelsus finds a way with Oral to use the fragments of the box that Peliquin broke in his and they stick it in his mouth like teeth.
And he puts it all back together like a puzzle with his mouth.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they accomplish the task of banishing the Cenobites when Auril chomps down on all the pieces and makes the configuration. So interesting. I mean, it's kind of corny, but within the confines of the comic book, it makes sense.
Do you understand why Pinhead and Chatterer didn't get sent back when the rest of them did? I don't.
No, I didn't. That's a good point.
I mean, they say that they were abandoned by Leviathan, but why? I mean, just because they're not part of this group, it doesn't. I don't know. That part doesn't really make sense to me.
I think that what happens is when they're being summoned back to hell, and you see all these like lightning filling in the room and all this stuff, kind of blue light dragging the Cenobites back to hell. You see Alastor at one point push Chatterer away from the portal. And I guess that because he hit Pinhead and he was in a weakened state, maybe he just didn't go back. Oh. Anyway, so they do stay behind, Chatterer and Pinhead, and they're taken as prisoners of war by the Nightbreed. Yeah, which is there's a really cool scene up ahead here where Kinski is looking at the Chatterer and says and talks about how ugly he is, which was kind of like a funny nod to Nicholas Vince, right? Just because his two characters looking at each other. I get it. Yeah, I missed that one. Yeah, that's a good catch. Yep. So they're immobilized by Narcisse and put in mystical restraints by Gallows using the Hand of Glory that. Narcisse keeps calling the hand job of glory.
and there's a scene here with Dagon holding them with his claws. So is Dagon still blind? I guess he must be.
He looks like he's got his eyes back. I don't know if those things grew back or something, but
yeah.
Or maybe the people who made this just didn't realize that he had lost his eyes in another Nightbreed issue. Yeah. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's the only time you're going to see Dagon anyway.
Yeah.
So meanwhile, Alastor goes to visit Atkins, the armorer of hell. And this is a character that was created, of course, as a reference to Peter Atkins.
Yeah, and he's really disrespectful to Leviathan. And he's like, you're not going to trick me with my words. And he refills the bellows and
he fixes them up. He patches up the Alastor Cenobites and gives them restores their weapons, and then he just wants them to leave that place before it gets really nasty. Because Atkins has always been this he's always been this angry Cenobite. He was a guy from the army and he got turned into a Cenobite, but he doesn't really drag the tow line, the party line.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he kind of does his own thing. So,
yeah, and people need him, and they put up with his sass talk.
Right. So it is interesting that catch you found here of Kinski talking trash about Chatterer's face. Yeah. That's I didn't notice that at first. Yeah. But another character that comes back from the Nightbreed Chronicles is the Thrall. The Thrall was supposed to be the dope pusher of Midian. He has all the good drugs. And he comes up with these little worms that can do the equivalent of a Vulcan mind meld.
Yeah, they go into your brain and then they come back out, and then you put them into somebody's brain, and then you put them in your brain, and all your memories mix together.
And this is where the story starts unraveling a little bit for me, because there's a giant 2-page splash again where they try to explain what's the connection between the Nightbreed, the Cenobites, Jacques de Molay.
Yeah.
And, what's going on here. And it's what I understood out of this. I'm going to let you go first. What did you get out of this vision thing?
That somehow the Cenobites were responsible for the schism between the Nightbreed and the humans. That they had caused this the Knights Templar to fail and to be executed, and they had somehow. It was supposed to be some sort of peace treaty maybe between the Nightbreed and the humans, and the Cenobites came in and messed it up. And
okay, so what I got out of this was similar to you. that Jacques de Molay, they explain how he got burned at the stake for killing, he was doing the church's work by destroying the Nightbreed, so his sword had tasted both human and Nightbreed blood alike. And then the Cenobites appeared to Jacques de Molay once, and they said, well, now your sword only needs to taste Cenobite blood and to complete a pattern. But they never explain what the pattern is. And basically what happens is that I think Jacques de Molay figured that he shouldn't follow what Hell was telling him, that it might be a bad idea to get his sword to touch Cenobite blood. But then, like you said, that when he was burned at the stake, this marked the rift between Nightbreed and mankind, even though Nightbreed is prophesized somehow to protect mankind from the Cenobites. And so, yeah, it's kind of confusing here. It's a little confusing. But anyway, the Nightbreed share this vision of the past with Pinhead.
Yeah, which is also interesting because, here's Pinhead, in 1200 and something, when his human counterpart was from 1930s or 1915 or whenever the World War I was. Right. Yeah.
So the breed decide that they need to summon Baphomet into this, and they remember that all the parts of Baphomet, or most of them, have made their way to this weird kind of place. I don't know if it's supposed to be Australia, if this is supposed to be a time loop like the one that we see in Great and Secret Show. It's just never really explained well where Jacques de Molay and Khadija are located. It seems like a place out of time.
The womb woman.
Right. And the only way they can find to transport themselves to that place is to do a ritual where you can create a mandrake root.
Yeah, and to do a flying spell. And it's explained only really hastily, and Paracelsus is like, oh, me and my homunculus, we'll make the sacrifice. And people are like, yeah, thanks. And it's kind of like, it seems like not enough emphasis was placed on the fact that, he's going to have to hang himself and die.
Right, because that's the rumor of, an old alchemical text and stuff. The way to create a mandrake root, and this is not true, of course, mandrake root is just another plant, but because the root usually has these little weird, looks like a little person because it's got several limbs that come out of the root. So if you have one that has like 4 limbs, it looks like a little person. So they would say that this root was grown from the floor after the sperm from a hanged criminal would hit the floor, and that would make a mandrake root bloom.
And when you pull them out of the ground, they scream so loud that they kill everybody around. So they used to say, like, you'd have to tie it to a dog, and the dog would pull it out.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
That's why he has his homunculus pull the roots out, because they also sacrifice themselves.
Right. Okay, I see it. Yeah, I didn't get that part. So, there's a little bit of foreshadowing here where there's a scene where Peloquin and Patricia are talking and kissing, and he says, well, Laurie told me you were having some problems, with your belly. And she says, oh, no, it's okay. It's just an upset stomach. It's nothing. And we know it's not nothing. We know that it's part of Alastor's plan.
Yeah.
And somehow they're sneaking through dimensions to see Peloquin and Patricia. And they recall their own romantic liaison when they were Roman citizens.
Yeah.
And so I think what's the name of the bird again? Chalkis.
Yeah, Chalkis.
Chalkis couldn't fulfill her love with Alastor because she didn't think she was worthy of his love because she was part of a really broken up, messed up family.
Yeah, her brothers and her father would rape her all the time.
Yes. And so what happened? Yeah.
Pretty horrifying. It's kind of strange that they make these characters so sympathetic in their human form and then so awful and unsympathetic as Cenobites.
I agree. Yeah. Well, they're damned souls because at one point Chalkis decides that enough is enough, and when she was still human, she decided to find a old recipe that kind of looks like it was written on this a scroll made from the stomach of an eyeless man who could still see.
Yeah.
But it looks like there's a weird text written in Greek. And there's a sketch of a little Hellraiser box in it or something. And then she does this recipe, and it's a really gruesome recipe, right?
Yeah. I mean, he says, doesn't he say, like, where are your brothers? And she says, like, here you go, or something like that. It's sort of a double entendre because...
Yeah, she gives him a stew, and then he discovers a ring, finger with a ring at the bottom of the stew.
Yeah, which is
means
one of her brothers, one of his sons.
Yeah, she fed her brother to her father, and then he died choking on that stew.
Yeah.
And that's how they became cursed.
Yeah. I guess they made a Faustian pact.
Yes, and so, but the thing is, Chalkis in the last story can never fulfill their love because Chalkis doesn't have a human form.
It's this weird sort of irony too, because they're always together because she's chained to him, but they can't ever be together, like you said, because she's a bird.
Right. So meanwhile, the breed do the ritual. Poor Paracelsus gets hanged from a tree by Gallows, which is a fitful name, I guess. Gallows. Yeah. She kind of hangs Paracelsus, and then they just send Pinhead and Peliquin back in time to this loop thing to meet Khadija and Demolay.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that they, it's that they made Pinhead and Peliquin kind of the main heroes of this comic series.
Right. So they're going to take Boone's body, and they're going to go into that loop, and they want to summon Baphomet and tell him, hey, look what's going on here. Here's a Cenobite. Here's Boone. Help us. So that's what happens.
And at this point, when you're reading the comic, you're going, there's not very many pages left. So they've got a lot of stuff to get through before the end of this comic, and it kind of shows a little bit.
Yeah, like I said, I think this would have benefited from having another couple of issues to fill out the story. Like, I would like to know where they traveled to and what's the deal with this whole thing. And the story, like I said, in that vision that they share with Pinhead, it's never really clear exactly what his sword was supposed to turn into, if it had tasted like blood from all three kinds of creatures, like Nightbreed, Pinhead, and human.
Yeah, but it's instrumental in this story. And then this Aboriginal guy who's swinging the bull roarer, he can't do it fast enough because he's old. And it's like, who is this character? Is he unnatural somehow? Is he a Nightbreed? Pinhead takes his arm off and swings his arm around holding the bull roarer, and he's like, oh, that's nice.
Yes, because it had to be his hand spinning the bull roarer, which I'm going to assume is like one of those shaman instruments.
Yeah. But it's weird, right? I mean, these characters seem to be pretty indifferent to their own suffering, like Paracelsus hanging himself, and which is not that big of a deal to anybody, or this guy getting his arm ripped off is like, oh, look at that, look at it go,
Yeah, I haven't been able to do that with my arm in years.
Yeah.
I think it's not out of the realm of possibility to imagine that Pinhead, being the skilled, experienced surgeon, that he could probably find a way to block the pain and cut someone's arm off without much problems. Also, these characters here, I don't know if they're supposed to be alive or dead. Demolay was burned at the stake, and yet here he is. He's kind of a ghost. I don't know. They don't really explain why these two characters are here in front of the fire for centuries.
That the fire didn't consume him or something. I don't really understand it either. It's really...
Right.
I think it could, like you said, it could have used more time to explain.
Yes. Anyway, the bull roarer from Khadija summons up from the earth Kunapipi, the womb woman, which is this kind of like structure made out of rocks and ground that kind of turns into a woman with her legs spread open. And so Pinhead just walks in there with Boone.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had kind of wondered at the time, is that womb woman there to sort of reassemble the pieces of Baphomet, to make him into a god, and if that's the case, why hasn't it happened already?
That's what it looks like, because when Pinhead goes in there, that's what he sees. He sees the parts of Baphomet all spread out on the floor.
Yeah.
And this might be a sort of like a womb of sorts where Baphomet is restoring his body, right? That's what I got out of this.
But why do they need Pinhead to do that? And they say, like, oh, if I go in there, we're toast. Like, Pelican can't go in there or he'll die. But so why does Pinhead get to do it?
Yeah, that is true. They never really explained that. So, again...
It's not something that was ever explained in previous issues of Nightbreed either.
Yeah. I think it was a way to get Baphomet's attention, to send a Cenobite in there and to do contact. Maybe that would bring Baphomet out of his stupor, I guess. That's the only explanation I can come up with. It's totally my own speculation.
I like the part where Pinhead is carrying Boone in there, and he says, what I could do is I could just kill Baphomet and Boone right here, and score lots of points for the war against chaos for Leviathan. And then he says, the Cenobite crushes the thought, making a mental note to painfully excise that frenzied lobe of his brain.
Right.
It's interesting to think about, that they control themselves and they scar and cut themselves to the point of even being able to pinpoint specific parts of their brains that make them think in a certain way.
You think he just pushed one of those pins in a little more? Like, think, there you go. I got that part, that little pesky memory. I don't know. I think that what defines Pinhead really is his discipline and his sense of order and sense of, duty. So I'm not surprised that the thought would creep in, but then he'd be like, well, I have to fulfill whatever prophecy we're talking about here and just do what I'm supposed to do.
But he kind of goes rogue in Hellraiser 3 and in the Boom Hellraiser comics and in the Scarlet Gospels. He kind of, is sick of hell and he wants to do his own thing, which is not the Pinhead from these comics.
So Pinhead gets out of the Womb Woman doorway, and he does some sort of joke about Jacques de Molay being untrustworthy for the last 679 years. But so in any case, what goes on is that they're just waiting to see what happens. And after he drops Boone in there with Baphomet, and Pinhead reveals that there's a duplicity at work between the Kingdom of Hell and humanity. That duplicity is coming in the form of Alastor's plan. So he is using Patricia's fetus from her and Pelican, and he wants to turn that baby as having human blood, Nightbreed blood, and taint of Cenobite, which I'm guessing is going to be played out here next. But using that baby, they'd be able to fulfill some sort of prophecy where they could every time that fetus doubled its cells or something, that it was an embryo, a living configuration, constantly, obsessively solving its way towards life. And I like the way he wrote this, because that makes a lot of sense.
And you kind of get the impression that as long as this baby is alive, or this person is alive, that the Cenobites can get free admittance to Earth as much as they want. Right.
And Patricia, meanwhile, back in the Nightbreed lair, Patricia suddenly gets affected by convulsions and pain, and she gleams with blue light, and then she disappears. She gets transported into Leviathan's realm, and and then something happens, and we don't see what it is. But then they cut to hell, and we see Patricia's being held in place with Alastor, and Alastor is going to deliver that baby and eat it. So these stories have a lot of cannibalism and a lot of sex and a lot of infanticide going on, and we're going to see also some of that in the Nightbreed issues that we're going to talk about.
I was thinking about that too. It's geez, there's a lot of hellish, baby deliveries and eating babies and rescuing babies and killing.
So somehow somehow Pinhead and Demolay and Peliquin make their way to Hell. I don't exactly know how they managed to cross into that, since Pinhead was stranded in our world, right? But then I guess that since they're from another mystical place, they can just show up here with Baphomet. Probably the power of Baphomet transported them into Hell.
Yeah, and so maybe they can do it again. I mean, obviously they had to get back somehow too. So.
And then I like this fusion between Boone's human body and Baphomet's disembodied parts.
Yeah, it looks really cool.
Yeah, it does.
I was a little sad that he didn't come back really in the next series of comics that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's true. So let's see.
So Alastor is looking kind of perverted and disgusting, and it seems like his human counterpart. That's the kind of person that he murdered, right? That he killed those brothers of Chalkis.
Yes.
So now he's kind of that way, leering, pushing her legs apart and leering at her and sticking his tongue out, and he's going to put his hand in there to try to get the baby.
So Demolay kills one of the Cenobites. So finally his steel finds his mark, and this causes the sword to complete the pattern, and it will find the poison conception. So Demolay, in his dying breath, hands his sword over to Peliquin and says, "You know what you got to do." Meanwhile, Cabal / Baphomet summons Leviathan.
Yeah.
And Leviathan appears and I guess is made aware that Alastor is trying to betray him. Yeah. Is trying to get this power where if he eats the baby, then he will be able to go through a portal and gain godhood, right?
Yeah.
That's his. They have to go through. He mentions like the name of this gate. Where is it? The Descent of Avernus. So,
okay.
A gate in hell that would open, and then he would be able to go through it and gain adult godhood. So,
which is what he wanted for himself and Chalkis.
Yes. Again, this is explained very vaguely, so it's kind of hard to understand exactly what's going on. But yeah, Peliquin has to sacrifice his baby and Patricia. And he jumps on them with a sword, and he not only kills them, but he also gets Alastor's hand stuck in there because the sword goes through his hand, which at the time was inside Patricia, as hard as this may seem. But yes, and then Leviathan discovers what's going on. He strips Chalkis and all the other Alastor Cenobites out of their power.
And they're happy about it. They're like, "Yay, we're human again. We can finally be together."
Yeah.
It's like they don't stop and think, what's going to, all those enemies around us, what's going to happen to us?
Yes. You're like, we're free. We're humans again. Oh, let me kiss you. And then Cabal says, "Hey, Peliquin, I'm going to suspend my rule of not eating human flesh here so you can go and eat them."
Yeah.
And that's what happens.
And we see him diving on them and slashes with his fist, and like somebody's head explodes.
Yes.
And their eyes flying out. And,
he chews their bones, and then he buries Patricia's body, and so that's it. And then Demolay finally realized his configuration and the sword, so he is taken down to the pit of everlasting torment in hell. Which is not a good ending for him, I guess.
Yeah.
So yes, and then they say, Cabal says to Pinhead, "So what now?" And it's like, "Can we exist together? Why do we have to fight each other?" And Pinhead is very fatalist in his reply. He says, "We do not question our existence, Cabal, or what it calls us to. Indeed, we cannot. Ours is a predestiny of precision that you may pray. You never know. You may pray."
Yeah.
And he says that, "Look to your God for answer, Cabal. Baphomet knew when he took his name from the Latin root Baphos. It means heaven." So And he says that maybe it'll take 100 years, maybe it'll take 10,000 years, but the war is still on, that hell doesn't change. Mm-hmm. And it will continue to try to fight the chaos of the Nightbreed.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall, really good. I like the first book much better than the second one. I think the first book takes a lot of time to set the story, and then the second book is like, oh, we got to wrap this up. Right.
I got that impression as well.
Yeah,
I got that impression as well. But very enjoyable, great artwork. I love the writing. I love that this Pinhead sounds like Pinhead, and like you said, the only thing I don't like is that Leviathan seems to be very clueless as to what's going on.
Yeah.
Right? He seems to be...
kind of like you just... And Pinhead's kind of like, oh, you just wait till I tell Leviathan what you're doing.
Yeah. Anyway, so very, very cool stuff. Paul Johnson artwork, Dan Chichester writing. So very, very cool. If you can find a copy of this, I don't know how rare it is. Please get a copy of this because you will enjoy it.
So... I think we kind of decided here that we spend so much time on Jihad that we'll put off the Rawhead Rex comics until next time.
Yes. So in another 4 weeks, I guess, we'll be talking about issues, or 3 weeks, we'll be talking about issues of Nightbreed 13, 14, 15, and 16, which is a 4-parter story with Rawhead Rex returning to the Nightbreed universe. So stay tuned for that.
And this podcast, having no beginning, will have no end. You can find the show notes for this episode, as well as lots of news and features at www.clivebarkercast.com. Leave comments there, or get them directly into the podcast by clicking the Send Voicemail tab on the right. Please follow us on Twitter at BarkerCast or at Occupy Midian, like us on Facebook, and join the Occupy Midian Facebook group. You can listen on the site or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Libsyn, TuneIn, Pocket Cast, Google Play, and Double Twist. Look for our apps in the iTunes Store or Google Play Store. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Please take a couple of minutes to leave us a review on iTunes. It means the world to us and helps us spread the word about Clive Barker. The Clive Barker Podcast, or BarkerCast, is an independent editorial fan site and podcast that is not affiliated with or under contract by Clive Barker or Seraphim Films. This is a labor of love by the fans for the fans.
Thanks for listening.